So far we have looked at building out our queries by using either temporary or permanent tables. These techniques require that a user has access to be able to create tables within the database. However, if you are in a situation where you do not have such access to be able to create tables, then we still have the option to use what are known as common table expressions, CTEs. Common table expressions are similar to temporary or volatile tables in that they only persist during a user's session and will be automatically deleted if a user's session is closed or interrupted. Common table expressions can be used in conjunction with select, update, and delete statements. To define one or more common table expressions, we define these statements within a with clause. Once we have defined our common table expressions, we can reference them multiple times throughout our query, as if we were accessing a normal table. The main benefit of using such common table expressions is that data is loaded directly into a database memory, making them very fast for read and write access, as data is not recorded directly to a database's hard disks. A drawback of using common table expressions is that we cannot define indexes, and the SQL engine will be left to interpret our data. When an index is not provided, the default for most databases is to use the first available value in a query as the index. Therefore, when creating such common table expressions, I would structure my select statements as if I were building out an actual table, and try to optimize the select statement as much as possible. For example, if I am selecting data and want to order the data in memory, I will combine my select statement with a group by statement, where attributes that are grouped in my select statement are ordered in ascending order. Therefore, even though we can't define our own indexes, we can still make some assumptions as to how the SQL engine will handle our data when it comes to executing the queries. In some scenarios for productionizing queries, we may actually want to use common table expressions instead of using permanent or temporary tables. For example, if I only need to run a small query in production that I know will not take up much resources, then I may choose to use a common table expression, thus minimizing my impact on the database where no permanent tables will be written to the database's server. In today's modern data-driven businesses, we find more business owners starting to write their own SQL queries, and with common table expressions, a user can quickly access their data without having to fully understand how to first create and optimize tables, and can build out relatively complex queries without impacting the overall back-end database. Business users can store their queries alongside their working documents or even embed them directly into spreadsheets and refresh the results anytime they open up such a document. So as you can see, for real-world applications for a business user, common table expressions can be a very useful tool if you need to write SQL queries, but don't necessarily have the access for creating tables. For our live coding example, I will now show you how we can recreate our sales query to use common table expressions. To start, I've opened up my sales project query, and I will now work through this query to show you how I can change parts of this query to use common table expressions instead of using permanent or temporary tables. But before I start making any modifications, I will make a copy of our query. So I will go and save script as, and I've got a file here now called sales project CTE for common table expressions, which we can go ahead and work on. And this won't disrupt our existing query. As you may remember, at the beginning of our sales project, I showed you how you can create tables by either defining a table structure by using the create table and then providing the parameters, followed by an insert statement into that table to populate the table. The next method I showed you then was how you can create a table by just merely providing a select statement into a create table, and this is our create table as, and this is what we're going to work on with our with statement. So to start with, I will remove our first section. And for this example, I'll assume I'm a business user who doesn't have create table access, and hence I need to be able to set up some form of table structures using common table expressions, and therefore I'm also going to assume that I don't have create database access. But you can use these methods even if you have or don't have access to create tables. So in this scenario, again, we will connect to our database and we will use the sales database. Even though we're not going to be writing to the sales database in this scenario, we still want to be accessing a given database when required. I can remove the drop statement. With common table expressions, instead of saying create table as, we define this now as with, and we don't need to provide which database we're going to be connecting to, as it's going to be written into memory. But ideally, we do want to be using a database, so we can define that information will be stored somewhere locally to memory. So in this scenario, if we're saying use sales, we're in the capacity of the sales database area. So we can go ahead and we can change this create table to with Cust California as. And this is now the first of our common table expressions, which we can reference later on in our query as just Cust California. As noted, I'm unable to create indexes. But if I did want to order the data within memory, I could provide such an expression as and group by each of our attributes. And by enforcing the group by, this will order our data when it is stored into memory. Next, we have our CustPay detail. But this time, instead of defining a with clause again, I just merely add a comma to say that we're continuing on with our with statement from above. And we can put the as here, go down to the bottom of our query and define the closing bracket. So from here we had sales Cust California. In this scenario, as we're not writing to the sales, we can call our Cust California from our with clause, our common table expression, and use it within our next common table expression. So this is where common table expressions become very powerful, that we can actually start referencing them as we are creating them. So for this, you can see we've got CustPay detail as we're accessing Cust California, which is our common table expression that we started off with, and we're now referencing that in our second common table expression, CustPay detail. Finally, we have our CustPay total table, which, if you remember previously, we created a table to store our final results. In this scenario, we won't be storing our results to a table, so the most we can look to do is output the results back to our screen. For this, we can remove the create table, and we're left with just the select statement. I will also remove the alter statements where previously we were adding additional columns for the District of California. And if needs be, we could add in similar columns in our previous statements if we wanted to specifically identify for California. But for now, just to demonstrate the use of common table expressions, I will also remove these and the final select statement, which would have been from our final output table. We can go ahead and remove sales from CustPay detail. but we can still keep our Sakula customer and Sakula address. So that should be our query ready now to run. And I can check this by performing an explain on the overall query. And as you can see here, we have quite a lengthy explain where it's showing us the various different tables and common table expressions that this is generating. And in each, we also have an approximation of how many rows are coming back and the final output. So I will go ahead and selecting the entire statement, or I can just run everything. I can say execute all. And we can see our summary of information has come back here. In this scenario, we had just for California. So if I wanted, I could change this and comment out California. And again, I can just run for everything. This may take slightly longer. Again, I will perform a explain on the overall query just to see how this differs. So not too much in a difference. Again, we're just expanding on the where clause. And what we should see is more information coming back in our results. If needs be, I could rename the common table expression from Cust California to customer all. But for now, I will just go ahead and execute. This time I'll select for all. So we can see here, we have a lot more information coming back this time. And if I wanted to, I can export my results out into a TXT file. So I'll go ahead and do that and provide a timestamp. And this will be a CSV file. So to recap, using common table expressions, we can take existing queries and rewrite these if needs be using our with clause. And this can be useful if we don't have the means to write tables to the database. As you can see here, we've been able to define two statements, two common table expressions, one for customer California, one for the payment details, and we've got our expected results coming back, just as we had for our previous sales query. For some analysts, common table expressions are actually a lot easier to read because you are reading this as if you were reading it like a business user. You are literally just defining what you want to see, and there's no in-between statements such as defining tables or insert statements. So for a business user, or if you're presenting results back to a business, sometimes it is useful to rewrite your queries using such common table expressions so that a business can quickly come to grips with what your query is trying to do. So in this scenario, as I've identified, we have customers followed by their payment details, followed by a select statement with the summary of their information. That concludes this section on common table expressions.